Welcome back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life, the podcast. You're listening to Author's Corner, where we highlight and showcase our local authors. Today, I am speaking to Rodney E. Walker, author of America's First Black Navy SEAL, Bill Goines, Forged Through Adversity. And Rodney and I are going to be talking today on the topic, the story of Bill Goines, Forged Through Adversity. Welcome, Rodney.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. All right. So let me give you guys a brief synopsis of the book. Bill Goines is an American hero with an exceptional life story. He completed 3 tours in Vietnam, fighting the communist Viet Cong, and orchestrated over 100 dangerous missions without ever getting shot, attaining the highest enlisted rank in the Navy. While the community of U.S. Navy SEALs largely accepted him for his superior abilities, he still struggled for racial acceptance at home during the Civil War era. Many anecdotal experiences are described in the segregated town of Norfolk, Virginia. Goins, who had to teach himself to swim because there is no public swimming pools for blacks, and became highly favored in the Navy SEALs, he was selected to lead over 100 Montagnard ethnic villagers and successfully turned them into an elite commando force, which earned him an award of recognition. Awesome. Well, that's just a brief synopsis, and I hope that we will share a bit more of his story in our conversation today. And then, for those who would like to pick up a copy of the book, you can get the rest. So, as I start off, Rodney, can you tell me, because you're writing a story about someone else, how did you come to meet Bill Goines, the Navy SEAL, and what inspired you to tell his story?
Well, a little bit about my motivations. I went to college as a writer to learn writing. It was like my undergrad, my minor, that is. And so I spent a lot of time. I had come from California, Hollywood, and I went to little old Sioux City, Iowa, a private college, uh, to to learn journalism. And one of the challenges in Sioux City, Iowa, was not a lot of things were going on. Back in California, there's all kinds of news, there's all kinds of celebrity news, but when you go to places like Sioux City, Iowa, the challenge was, as a writer, as someone who's learning to write or practices writing, where do I get the story? And I had to think, what makes a good story? The women's auxiliary, it wasn't really a good story, but those are the kinds of things that were happening. So I really disciplined myself in trying to find a good story. And I've always had that with me in my mind. Now, when I met Bill, the way I met Bill was I was substituting. Actually, I was teaching at a school where he had been a security. He ran the security after he retired from the SEALs. And I went to the principal, a visiting principal, and I said, "You know what? I happened to meet," and I was talking to him about another man. I said, "I happened to meet a guy who was the last officer in the Band of Brothers, that Band of Brothers series." And it was a man who, Edward Shames, I had met, and I was trying to interview him and write about him. Fascinating man. And and the principal kind of one up to me. He said, "Well, I happen to know the first Black Navy SEAL."
Nice.
I said, "Are you kidding me?" And I thought for a minute. I thought that'd be such a great story. I mean, the first Black Navy SEAL, knowing the SEAL's background and the era from which they came, because I teach history. I teach U.S. history. I teach world history. I thought this would be a great story. It was just in my mind, and so to make a long story short, I said, "Can I meet him?" And the SEAL community is very closed. It's very exclusive. You have to know someone to know someone to
Want to
do.
get introduced, right? Yep.
And I said, Can you just, I want to meet him. Can you introduce me?" He said, "No, I'll give him your number, and if he wants, he'll get in touch with you." I said, "Okay." I waited 3 months, and Bill wasn't connected with me, and I thought, "I've gotta think like a seal here now."
Yeah, right.
I'm determined to get to this guy. So I did a little, background check, and I went into, his archives, and I looked at some newspaper articles about him, and I found where he last was I at a kind of a community, event, a charity event, and I found out where he was, and I called the people from the event, and I said, "Look, I'm trying to get into Bill Goines. I have the best of intentions. I've been waiting for him to call me. I'm just wondering." And the guy said, "Well, sure, I have this number. Let me give it to you." so, so I got his number. I called Bill, and I think he was surprised and impressed because he was thinking, how did this guy get my number? But anyway, I think he was impressed with that. And from then we met. I gave him some samples of writings I had accomplished. I said, "I want to do a story about you, and these are some samples," and then we kind of took it from there.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's great. That's great. So yeah, what you're saying is that you were interested in doing stories as a history person. You navigated to this particular story.
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah, the first Black Navy SEAL. So yes, as you started talking to him, I'm sure he told you about the challenges he had to overcome to become a Navy SEAL in a segregated America. And I love the fact that you said that he learned to swim or he had to teach himself to swim because there were no, public swimming pools for Black people through, in his era. So, and I love the fact that part of your book's tagline is forged through adversity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell us, what did Bill tell you? How was it like growing up in segregated America? What are a couple of the things that stood out to you?
Right. Well, for one thing, I did choose the subtitle "Forged Through Adversity" because it's actually a SEAL motto. It's one of the
Oh,
models,
okay.
models, and it does describe
I know, right?
his life and his coming to the SEALs. Now, he started actually in the mid-50s. He saw a film about an underwater commando force. And I believe it stars Richard Widmark, and it's this old film about the UDT was underwater demolition teams they had
Mhm.
back then. They didn't have SEALs yet until Kennedy. They had underwater demolition teams, and they had to go underwater and blow things up and set booby traps. And he loved that film, and he said, right then, he said, "My destiny was decided. I chose to work with UDT, and nothing was gonna deter me." At that time, though, in the Navy, there was segregation had been ended through, Truman's, executive order, but there was still not integration in the military, and there were many careers or jobs which were reserved, for people of color, and they were kind of shepherded that way to do things like stewardships, cleaning, cooks,
Of course.
like
Right.
that. And Bill had been warned that, they were gonna try to recruit him into that field, one of
Mhm.
those fields, and he decided, he said, "No, I'm just gonna go anyway." Uh, and he just kinda went. It was an army buddy who was trying to tell him, "Hey, consider the army because the Navy's not gonna get you what you wanna do." But there weren't any underwater demolition teams in the army, so he actually signed up. He went through a process where they had stopped the underwater demolition teams because the Korean War was over. They didn't think they needed. They stopped it, and then they tried to direct him towards something else. So he temporarily chose, I think it was radar, radio, or something else, because he didn't want to end up in a place where he didn't want. So he chose something else, and then finally they reenacted the underwater demolition teams.
Mhm.
And they went back to him and said, "Do you still want to be part of this?" And he said, "Absolutely." And so that's when he went in, and Bill had come from an athletic background. He played basketball. The family farm. His grandfather had a farm, but they didn't have a workhorse, and Bill was the workhorse. so they So he had to plow,
Nice.
so he was
It was
pretty
pretty fit, right? Okay.
strong, pretty determined, and they saw these characteristics when he was in the UDT, team, underwater demolition team. The But because of the era, because we're talking the Cold War era, and I do want to make that correction. If I had written civil rights era, I
Okay.
thought I thought I might have heard you say Civil War era, but more civil rights era, Cold War era. Uh, they had their eye on Bill. Bill was doing exceptionally well, and federal people were watching him as he was in UDT, and he even became an instructor in UDT. And so he was a part of the Bay of Pigs, the attempted invasion on Cuba, and because of the failure of that, there was this move to get a commando force together. Because it was a Cold War era, there was a lot of espionage going on, and now we're talking about unconventional warfare. You see, we're moving from conventional war to unconventional,
No, right.
and Biddle, in many ways, was unconventional. And so they observe a couple of guys for over about a year or two, and then that's when Kennedy comes up with his plan for the Green Berets and the Navy SEALs as an unconventional commando unit, and Bill is offered a position. They had to invite them in because they couldn't force them. UDT was remaining at the time, but they said, "This is a new unit. We're transitioning some of you guys, if you want, from UDT to the SEAL teams," which stands for sea, air, and land, and you'll be doing a lot of different things. And
Okay.
Bill liked that idea because he was a little bit bored with UDT. It was kind of routine. It's like just blowing things up, doing some water maneuvers. But being a SEAL had a lot of more options for him.
Right.
Attractive
Okay.
to him.
So there's a couple good things in that story. One, I love the determination. I love the fact that I love when people know their purpose and their destiny immediately by watching something or reading something. The way I got into like coaching, I saw the word and I said, that's what I want to be. So I understand that inspiration. But you skipped right to where he became a Navy SEAL, but we talked about the fact that how did he learn to swim and learn to swim so well to become, be part of the underwater demolition team and a Navy SEAL? Because I'm telling you, I I have read several books on the Navy SEAL, and I've interviewed some of the top Navy SEALs on this program. So I know about the underwater training and how bad it is and the whole Hell Week and all that type of stuff. So
Yeah.
so how did he prepare for underwater demolition? Where did he learn to swim or who taught him?
Yeah. Well, he had seen a buddy. Well, I don't know if he actually saw the buddy, but a friend of his was drowned when he was very young. I think around 9 years old, and they would swim in a creek, and the buddy got trapped under a fallen tree, a branch underwater, I believe. And Bill had, again, because of segregation, they couldn't be taught to swim by any swimmers, and in the African American community, swimming was not a very popular thing
Until
to
now,
do.
most African Americans don't know to swim.
Right. But he was determined when he knew he had learned to swim enough as a young child to find his own rhythm, find his own stroke. And I think that was part of when he saw that film later on, he kind of made some connections because he brought himself up to swimming. He wasn't the best on his team, but he was good. And when they trained, I mean, I think at that time they had to swim 8 miles uh, on a swim test. And I asked him, was there any time you just wanted to quit? He said he said no. He had seen people quit, and all you had to do was ring a bell,
Ring a bell, yeah.
and he said that's it. But it wasn't an option for him
Oh,
because he
that's
he he
beautiful.
he pretty much knew his. kind of saw his future and that this was a task I had to get out of the way to get to where I wanted to go. But things like underwater judo training, he went through. They had to swim with sharks. And he said, in the daytime, they didn't bother you. At nighttime, you didn't want to be around them. He was actually part of a recovery group that had to find a shark that had taken off the arm of one of their somebody. Yeah, died. Someone who was playing with sharks a lot. They called him Sharky, I believe. And he was out on that task, and they found the shark. They had to open him up, and then they found the arm of the arm that's with a watch, UDP
That's a
watch.
different kind of recovery.
Yeah, but he wasn't deterred. He again that was a task as a young person that he overcame on his own, learning to swim. And I think at that point he pretty much had the self confidence from that to know that if I can set my mind to anything, I can get over it.
Yes, yes. Okay. So, if we were going to say some of his outstanding characteristics, I would, from what you've mentioned so far, determination, vision,
Yeah.
and right, and just wanting to make a difference. Is there anything else?
Bill, as I got to know him, he became kind of like an uncle to me. And in
Okay.
fact, it's interesting because I saw him kind of like family. In fact, when I do book signings, people always look at the poster, they think it's me, or they ask, "Oh," I say, "No, no, 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 no. I could never fill this man's shoes." Uh, but he kind of opened up because I could relate a lot to his experiences.
Mm.
And to me, it seemed kind of eerie almost sometimes. But I thought, wow, because when I grew up, I grew up in a private school, and I was in my class. I was the only African American boy for 7 years,
Mm.
and so I grew up. And there's certain dynamics to that, and the way he grew up and the way entering SEALs, he kind of said some things which I could relate to.
Yeah.
But one of the
Well,
things,
obviously, he was the first and only black embassy outside.
yeah, in this new group called the SEALs. That's right.
Right, right, right. Hmm.
And, but he said that there wasn't a lot of opposition to him, which really reflects on the character of these early SEALs. They were radical men, and they were movers and shakers, and they were just different. And they would say, for example, when Bill would go to when they all go out to eat or something off duty, they go into a restaurant, and the owner would say, "No, no, no, he can't come in here with you." Uh, And, the SEALs would say, "Well, if he can't come in here, we're gonna turn this place out." And they're about to, flip over tables,
He can do it too. Yes.
and,
Wow.
so there was this kind of camaraderie in this SEAL team too.
Yeah. Well, because you're responsible for each other's lives. Isn't that what the army is about? No man left behind kind of thing. So you gotta like your teammate because
Wow.
you expect him to save you,
Right.
or you know what I mean? Is that the whole concept of it?
Yes, and at one point, one of his fellow teammates, James Watson, I believe, wrote in his book, at a certain point, you do become colorblind. It's,
Mm.
uh, it's not,
I love that.
you gotta put all of that stuff away, all of these these, attitudes away, and see the value of your brother and know his strengths and weaknesses, and, so that was a thing. There were some stories he shared, though, also, new people coming in and people still struggling with that. When he became a chief, there was a man who came in and said, "Chief, I'm from Georgia, and I've never even seen a black man in my town except for a worker, some laborer who comes and goes every now and then." And the guy said, "You know what? I don't think I'll be able to take orders from you,
Wow.
because this is something I'm not expected. I've never have been expected to do, and it's a little awkward for me." And he was kinda coming clean with Bill, and, Bill was very diplomatic. He sat him down, offered him coffee, and said, "You know what? You're gonna ruin your whole career. We've been through the same training, and we can't have that kind of thing. It's not going to work in the SEALs. I'm going to have to talk to the commander about this.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah, and he said, "You're gonna be ready. You're gonna have to go back on the ship, do ship duty." And the guy, he said, "Okay, please don't tell commander. I just wanted to, to see about how we can get over this." Bill gave him a chance, and he went on to be an outstanding SEAL. Bill told me. So there were still some people who had
I
that.
love that. This is a good book because it's touching on some really great important topics
Yeah,
that are still relevant today, of all things. Talking about the Cold War era, we still got it going on right now. But anyway, go ahead.
yeah. Well, the beautiful thing is that once I released it, I got an Instagram. Maybe I, maybe I didn't tell you this from an actor. I won't reveal who he is just yet, but he has this great show on Netflix, and anyway. He says, "Who's got the copyrights to this book?" And I said, "They do." And he said, "Well, I want to do a movie about this."
You actually told me that. That's
Oh, you did?
beautiful. Yeah.
I mean,
Because yes, this would make a great movie.
yeah,
Great movie.
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And the interesting thing is the movie about Carl Brashear, the one with Cuba Gooding and Robert De Niro called
No. A
Men of
good
Honor,
man or something. Right. Mm.
about the first African American Navy diver.
Okay.
He,
Mm.
well, he was a buddy of Bill's, and they would run together here in Norfolk, a place on the SEAL base called Little Creek. They would run around there together, and Bill would tell me how he would take off his prosthetic limb because back then the prosthetic limbs weren't as what they are today,
Right.
kind of very high tech, and he would have to take this off, this hollow shell off, and there'd be blood in it. He would just pour out the blood, uh, and he would soak his limb in warm water and salt to kind of heal it up. And they say, "Well, why don't you just go to the hospital?" Bill would say, "Just get fixed up at the base hospital." And Brashear would say, "No, because they're trying to get me out. They're trying to discharge me, and I don't want to give me any excuse,
Yeah.
either
Yes.
be a medical discharge." But
Wow.
both of them,
Wow.
they're contemporaries, but both of them had a similar
Yeah.
experience. And so that was encouraging. Along the way, Bill had encouragement from others too. I mean, he had a lot of self determination, but he had a lot of support from his family. He had his father, great relationship with his dad, and and buddies along the way, whether it had been SEALs or the Navy. Carl Brashear, the Navy diver, whose wife played at his funeral last June. Carl Brashear's wife was there,
Mm.
and I saw her playing. So I thought,
Well, that's great. So, how did he die and when?
well, Bill passed last June, kind of around this time. Uh, and it was a heart attack. He has issues because of Agent Orange, being exposed in Vietnam.
Mm.
Have a lot of work on his heart over the years.
Mm.
It was just common amount around vets because as a Navy SEAL, I mean, they're everywhere. Under underwater, they dig in the ground, they're in the foliage, and when they spray that napalm, it's just dripping, from the trees, and it's all around you. So he was exposed to a very high degree to orange. Yeah.
But he lived a long time, it looks like. How old was he when he died?
87. He did live a long time. He did go through a couple of heart surgeries and things, but he did have a good life.
Yeah,
And
87. It's pretty good because if he only died last year and we're talking about the 50s here. So yeah, that's a good life. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, he was happy he had made those decisions, no regrets. Uh So he was really just great to sit down and talk to. We would do this over during the COVID years. I'm a teacher and I would finish my online teaching and then think, well, wow, I've got all this time. I got to call Bill. And we had a schedule. We probably shouldn't have been meeting. I mean, everybody else was saying you can't meet and he's a senior citizen and, there's some risks. So we kind of broke protocol and sat and talked and really got to know each other. And I was very encouraged by him. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I listen. You know, I mean, we can all make excuses for not being who we should be or want to be. And the biggest excuse is like you're the wrong color. There's prejudices. There's people who are not, like the guy said, they want to get rid of me, so I'm not going to give them the opportunity. But you can always fall under the banner of, racism and segregation and all the things that are still happening right now, right? But it's great to rise above it, and say, I'm gonna succeed, or like, I have this quote that I love to say about this guy that was climbing Mount Everest, and he says, "I am going to I'm gonna climb Mount Everest, or you're gonna find me on the side dead." You know what I mean? So it's that kind of attitude. I love it. So Bill said the same thing. I want to be an underwater. I want to be a SEAL. That's what I want to do. And once you have that mindset, which is what this show is all about, you will succeed because you're gonna overcome those obstacles. Like the river, you go around them and you go over them. And so that was I love the story, and I hope they make it into a movie because it's got a lot to teach you. It's got a lot to teach you. So I know that one of the questions I have here is why did you write the book and what do you want readers to walk away with? So I already knew why you wrote it because you started off by saying that. So what do you hope telling the story when someone's finished reading the book, what do you want them to walk away with?
Well, a couple of things. I do want them to see that Bill was a genuine overachiever, and he's not. In this day, sometimes we struggle, we grasp on and build people up uh, symbolically, and we find these symbols of people who haven't really some often earned. Uh, the earned the status that we give them. You know, and Bill's not like that. He's not. It's not symbolism over substance. Bill's the real deal,
I like that.
and he actually was a trailblazer in so many ways, and no one made it easy for him. Uh, they supported him, but he had to show himself. Had to show himself, and he had to earn it. And that's what I like to for people to take away from this is that, he was determined. He was against went against a lot of odds, racial, social, physical, mental, uh, but he was determined. And you don't get anywhere by feeling sorry for yourself.
No, or making excuses of why you can't do it. It's true, right?
Absolutely. So he didn't as he was a gentleman at the same time. He didn't carry it on his shoulder, on his sleeve. Bill was I guess that might be a generational thing, but Bill, like James Bond of the early '50s or something, James Bond or Superman, and once he puts on his cape, he's completely different. But when he puts back on his cape, he's Clark Kent, and he can
Right.
relate to you.
Very,
He can
very
say,
humble. Right, right.
respectable, and that's the kind of man he was. Uh, when you got to talk to him, other things started to come out about what he had seen and the warrior, a real warrior side. But also, he was able to relate to just about anyone, and he can talk about things, without being the so-called. I don't want to use the expression, but without being overbearing as a warrior. So things I want people to take away from this is that one, Bill has a great example of someone who overcame the lower expectations of a lot of people, but actually decided in himself, was single-minded, disciplined himself, and got the best out of himself, pushed himself to get the best out of life.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's really interesting that you should end on that because I'm not quite sure if it was my first or one of the I don't remember if it was my first book on the Navy SEALs, but I've read David Goggins' book Can't Hurt Me. And that was a phenomenal book about pushing yourself. In fact, his tagline is "Stay hard," because he pushed himself. After he left the Navy SEALs, he became a runner that ran 120 miles and then swam Ironman running and swimming and doing all these different things. So, but yeah, yeah, you want to get the best out of yourself, and a lot of people don't ever get the best out of themselves. You know what I mean? They stay mediocre. So and underachieving. So yeah, I mean, after I read David Goggins' book, I wanted to start running at 60. That's how much he inspired me. Yeah, so awesome. So that's amazing. All right. So where can our listeners pick up a copy of your book? Obviously, we know it's on Amazon, but do you have a website? You mentioned that you're on Instagram. If you want to leave us your Instagram handle.
Oh, yes. You know what? That's an interesting one because I'm still getting used to Instagram. I think it's just Rodney Walker.
Okay, all right. I'll look you up and tag you. Okay.
I do have a website. I'm an author with a small publishing house in Louisiana called Ewing's Publishing. So rodneywalkerbooks.com is a way to find my website. This book is not on there. Another book is by Rodney Walker, rodneywalkerbooks.com. But you can get it at Barnes and Nobles. You can get it order it through Barnes and Nobles. That is online. I've done a couple book signings, and then obviously Amazon.
Okay.
You can get the book. Yeah, it's a short read, and I wanted to make it longer, but Bill was called home to his reward last June, and so I had to end the story. But we're looking forward though to becoming a movie. And, there's a lot of excitement behind that with the guy who wants to play Bill. In fact, he had gone out to Bill years. He would talk to Bill and say, "Look, tell me, I wanna do a special ops movie. Please talk to me about some of your missions." Bill's was always saying, "No, I'm not talking about that stuff." And, but, when the actor reached me, he said, "I wanna do his life." Uh, and some of the
Did he tell
missions
you about his missions?
he did. Well, he told me about one, and I think that's what drew the actor to and, several missions, Bill did a lot of different things, but this one actor he was really bent on a commando film, but
Right.
this has broadened himself a little bit to talk about Bill's life, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the slight change there. But yeah, there's a lot of action, because he did 3 tours in Vietnam, and just one last thing, his last tour he was what's called a PRU, that's a Provisional Reconnaissance Unit advisor, and, he actually led, as you mentioned, over 100 Montagnard men who were these men who were, they're minorities, a minority group in Vietnam. They're kind of castaways, looked down upon, not very respected, living very primitively. But anyway, Bill was able to take this group and he trained them into a fighting force where they won recognition from their own government. They were the most productive. There's three categories they fulfill: the most productive, the most well, there's two other ones. It's this my mind. It's in the book, and it
Right.
seemed Bill's award. He got a Combat V award for that, and they recognized what he did with these troops, with these people, primitive people in Vietnam. So that's another side of this story, and I hope the film brings that out because that's a triumph in
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Yeah, the last story on did you see Triple Eight about the women? That yeah, right. Sure. So as you were talking, I kind of remember, those kind of stories, and those films always do very well because it shows what, our people had to go through to succeed in this country and the army and the navy, the SEALs, that type of thing. So it's amazing. Yes.
Yeah.
So it becomes a success like that one. Yeah, because people really gravitated to that story. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I was very inspired talking to you about Bill Goines. And I love his spirit. I love his mindset. I love the fact that he was determined And yes, it's a good read. I'll pick up a copy myself and keep it on my bookshelf because it's great for the younger generation that's coming up, to hear these stories. They have everything given to them now. They need to know how people have struggled to when they want something, how they have to go out and get it, right?
Right.
Yes. All right. So I appreciate you writing the book. Appreciate you coming on this show to, to share information with the book. And yes, I'm going to have a summary of my conversation with Rodney on the show page, which is myhelps.us. I would also link out to his book and website and his Instagram so that you can follow him and get a copy of his book. So, Bill, Rodney, I enjoyed talking to you.
You talk a lot of people I know.
Yes, and good work for, to bringing this story to life. All right. So as we wrap up, any last words?
No, I want to thank you for welcoming me on your show and just kind of keep your feelers out and about the movie. Uh,
Yes. Yeah. Well, when it's available, just let me know, and I'm added to the blog post so that people can go and make a copy of it. So just keep me updated, and I will update the blog.
all right.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, thank you guys for tuning in to this week's episode of Author's Corner. We were talking to Rodney E. Walker, the author of America's First Black Navy SEAL, Bill Goines Forged Through Adversity. So definitely pick up a copy and learn about our ancestors and the life that they love. And if you are on YouTube, you see Rodney is holding up a copy of his book now, but I will have it on the show page.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful cover. Yes.
Thank
Hey
you.
guys, well listen, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, namaste.